Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Flavor and Fiction. So this week's category was a book of letters, and I have chosen Live from Death Row by Mumia Abu-Jamal. So I've been told that talking over by my bookcases kind of swallows up the sound. So until I can get a little mic to go with this, I'll talk over here in front of this nice, lovely blank wall. So anyway, back to the book. Mumia Abu-Jamal. And for those of you who don't know who he is, he was a member of the Black Panther Party from ages 14 to 16. And because of the pretty much the assassination of Black Party Panther members by government agencies, and because of infighting, he decided to leave at 16. And he finished high school, and then he became a journalist. And he worked for a radio station, and eventually he served as the president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. So at the time, there was a group called the MOVE organization in Philadelphia, and I won't get too much into it, but it was a Black liberation group similar to the Black Panther Party. And Mumia decided to report on some of their interactions and interactions with police officers. And he was kind of warned by his radio station not to do that. It would make them a target, but he didn't listen. So fast forward to, this is 1981, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding the details of his arrest. Mumia's claim is that he was basically minding his own business when he was recognized by a police officer and jumped. That's his side of the story. The police officer, what we do know is that the police officer is dead, and Mumia was shot and was unconscious. And when he regained consciousness, he was handcuffed in the back of a police car. He decided to defend himself, but the day of the trial, he was denied that opportunity. And his public defender was completely unprepared because they both agreed that Mumia should defend himself. Pretty much the public defender did not care. So, long story short, after eyewitness accounts of seeing a gunman flee down an alley, and their testimony was withheld, he was still sentenced to death. And this is his first book. He has several others, and I'll put a link to some of them below. This is his first book. It covers several years of his incarceration and just like his thoughts, and they're not just like random ramblings. He's extremely intelligent, and yes, he does discuss some of his philosophies that he's developed over the years after observations, but also talks about specific cases in prison and in the justice system where things did not add up. So one of the rare glimpses he gives us into his personal life is he described his wife coming to visit with their youngest daughter when she was finally old enough to recognize him. You know, they had, I guess, spoken and written, and she had been prepared, and now she was old enough to visit him. And when she came in, she was smiling, she was happy, and then she saw the glass between them because it was a no contact visit. So she ran up to the glass and was banging on the glass with her fists and crying, and it was just such a heartbreaking scene. So before I get too far into it, I know you're wondering, well, what are you making today? Okay, he didn't really talk about food in the book, but being that he was born and raised in Philadelphia and unfortunately incarcerated in Philadelphia, I decided to make a recipe using Philadelphia cream cheese. Is that okay? So what we're making today, and I'll put a little picture here, is a cheese Danish. So I actually have this thing in the oven already because it was going to take a while and I have to go to work, and so I just got it out of the way. But I'll put a little video later of how I did it. So one of the kind of firsthand accounts that he shares with us is about a fellow prisoner named Jay Smith, who was convicted. He was a high school principal who was convicted of, I think, 3 murders and sentenced to death. There was even a TV movie made about him. What was it called? The movie was called Echoes in the Darkness. So he lost everything. He had been on death row for 12 years when they finally overturned his conviction due to corruption between the prosecutor and everyone involved in the case. That people were paid to hide evidence, and it was just, to him, it sounded a lot like what he had been through. But Jay Smith, his conviction was finally overturned. I'm just going to read to you a little of what he wrote about Jay Smith being released. When one reporter asked him about his plans, he replied, "I don't know. I've been fighting so long for this that I hadn't planned for anything beyond. I'm 64. Maybe in a year I can collect Social Security. But what security exists in a system that plotted, lied, connived, and hid evidence to destroy one man's life, that took 12 years from his life, his profession, his family?" And so Mumia is wrestling with feelings of what would happen to him when he got out. He still, of course, wants to be let out, and he's adamant about his innocence. But it just makes you think about what the justice system and the prison system does to people. He also talks about a man named Bobby Brightwell, who was a prisoner who had some exercise yard time. He was handcuffed, being brought back in. They repeatedly searched him, and when he asked why they were doing that to him, they called him some racial slurs. I'm guessing you can imagine which one. They beat him like within an inch of his life, and left him alone for 12 days before getting him medical treatment. And Mumia testified that even, years later, the man still had trouble keeping food down. And shortly after that, because he pretty much reported the incident, he was beaten even worse. Months after that savage beating, his conviction was overturned and he was released. And this is what Mumia writes. In early September 1992, on trial under charges of assault by life prisoner, a common pleas jury found him not guilty, acquitting him of all charges. A trial observer said that when the verdict was returned, Brightwell didn't even smile. His mind probably was taken up with a picture of his tormentors, the guards, the well-paid civil servants who stole all but his very life and who have never been charged with anything. And that is or at least was, probably still is, a common practice, is that guards had pretty much carte blanche to abuse prisoners and, with no repercussions. So here's where I'm going to take a break, sort of an awkward break after this heavy conversation, to show you the video of how I made this cheese Danish. One point Mumia makes is the hypocrisy of the term corrections, especially when people are denied education. So I did not know this, but death row inmates were denied access to any type of educational materials. And this is what Mumia has to say about it. What societal interest is served by prisoners who remain illiterate? What social benefit is there in ignorance? How are people corrected while imprisoned if their education is outlawed? Who profits, other than the prison establishment itself, from stupid prisoners? And that's from November 1994. And on that note, I'm actually going to put a link to some of Angela Davis's work as well. There's a lot going on in prison reform and prison abolition. So yeah, take a look at some of these works. So Mumia is still fighting to this day. However, in 2011, he successfully commuted his sentence to life, and to life without parole instead of death row. So he is now off of death row. While he continues to still fight to overturn his conviction completely, he continues to write, continues to fight for prisoners' rights, and even prisoners who are released, their rights, because as he points out, Nelson Mandela, after being released, couldn't even vote in his own country. And people whose sentences are overturned and are proven innocent still don't have the right to vote. So there's a lot he's working on. And the latest is that in December of 2018, he was finally granted an appeal. All he wants to do is have the right to present his case. And so they're still back and forth about that because people are trying to protest his right to appeal. So he is still in a fight. So keep an eye on this in the news because it's going to be interesting. So that's it for Mumia Abu-Jamal. I'll put a link to the book. I actually got this from the library, but I'll put a link to where you can get the book below. And let's go check out this funny looking cheese Danish that I made. Okay, in my defense, you're supposed to let it cool and then put this like icing on top. I actually don't really feel like icing right now, so I'm just gonna cut a piece of this and taste it. Alrighty, here we go. This will be interesting. It looks a little cakey. I don't know. It's probably better with the icing after all. Here we go. Oh, that's really good. Even without the icing, it's really good. Probably because it's fresh out the oven. I'm about to make some coffee, go to work, and eat this. So, thank you for joining me for another Flavor and Fiction. And be sure to subscribe and tune in next week.